Hi everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today I am bringing you my end of April wrap-up / bags and babbles. As you can see, I have my little cup of tea here. It has a sort of lemon zingery kind of thing in it, which I thought was appropriate for the warm weather we've been having, which also explains if there's like weird lights and shadows and stuff going on. I apologize. I'm working with what I have right now. Sun keeps going back in and out of being behind clouds. Anyhow, let's go ahead and get into talking about some of the books that I finished reading in the second half of April. So since the last wrap-up Bags and Babbly type video that I did, I finished reading The Merry Spinster by Mallory Ortberg, now going by Daniel Ortberg, but that's the name the book is published under. And like I said, I think in a previous video, this is a collection of like creepy and weird short stories. Many of them are retellings or spin-offs, I guess, of folk and fairy tales. And I did not like this book as much as I was anticipating to like it. I thought that the writing, while it was really clever at times, actually ended up being a bit too clever. It kind of got in the way of my ability to enjoy both the language and the story, unfortunately. I think that the Velveteen Rabbit story, which if you're familiar with the Velveteen Rabbit from The Toast, you've probably already read before, but I think that was the strongest one in the collection. But yeah, I ended up putting this at about a medium rating for my own personal system. Next up, I also finished reading The Slow Regard of Silent Things by Patrick Rothfuss. This is a novella that takes place in the world of the Name of the Wind Kingkiller Chronicles stories, but it tells the story of Ari, who is a minor character who lives in the university that both sort of meets and befriends. And I really did like this book. It is not book 3 in the Name of the Wind series. Patrick Rothfuss is very clear when he writes like the introduction to this book that this isn't book 3, so if that's what you're looking for, you're gonna come away disappointed. It was very different from his regular sort of high fantasy writing. I found that this book was written in a much more poetic style, a more abstract style. I found that he writes the way that the character thinks. So reading these words was like, oh my god, I really feel like I am reading her thoughts as she thinks them. There's almost no action in this book. There's maybe like an 8-page sequence where she's making herself some soap, but other than that, there is not really a plot. It's just sort of like a window into what her life is like, living in the tunnels in and around the university. And I really, really enjoyed this. It made me feel sad, but in a really happy sort of way. I don't really know what a good word to describe that is. Perhaps melancholy. I don't know. Okay, the next book that I finished reading in the month of April was The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night, which is a short story collection by Jen Campbell, who is also a booktuber. I will go ahead and link her video down below. I did enjoy this collection. Again, with like most short story collections, I liked some of the stories better than others, but it was overall like a very good addition to her body of work. She, I think, is primarily a poet, but she also writes fiction, nonfiction. She's a children's book author, so I really enjoyed reading this installment in her work. We're gonna start that over. I also finished reading Lady Night, which is the 4th book in the Protector of the Small series by Tamara Pierce. This actually is my least favorite book in the entire series, but I was still glad that I read it because I was excited to see the sort of conclusion of Kel's story and her being able to fulfill the prophecy that the Chamber of the Ordeal lays out for her when she first becomes a knight. So even though it wasn't my favorite in all of the series, I think I like the first 2 better than I like the last 2, it was still really good. So the next few are some library books, which means that I don't have them to share with you right now. I will just try and get through those. I got caught up on the Miss Marvel comic book series. Miss Marvel Volume 6, which is the Civil War volume, is probably one of the greatest sort of graphic stories I have ever read, period. I also finished a couple of different memoirs this month. One of them was called Heartberries by Therese Marie Mailhot, and that was the story of a Native American woman writing her memoir in a series of poetic essays. She writes about her struggle with bipolar and mental illness and just sort of like abuse, relationships, very heavy subject matter, but written in a very poetic lyrical, and unusual way for a memoir. I think people writing memoirs tend to be a little bit more matter of fact when they're telling the stories of their lives. So it was definitely interesting to hear somebody's life story told through that type of prose. And then the other one, which I think was the best book that I have read, it's definitely going on the best books of 2018, but it was one of the best books that I have read all year, was called The Girl Who Smiled Beads, A Story of War and What Comes After by Clementine Wamaria. Clementine is writing her story about being a survivor of the genocide that happened in Rwanda in the 90s. She actually has like a whole section of the book where she talks about like the meaninglessness of the word genocide to adequately capture exactly what it is that happens. It fails to capture the individual suffering and the individual impact of like war crimes and crimes against humanity on people. But anyway, this world event is happening when she's 6 years old, and she and her sister are able to escape the country, and they spend most of her childhood and teenage years sort of bouncing around as refugees with no legal papers, no legal rights, no safety or security or anything like that around these different countries in the southern half of Africa before they're able to make it to the United States. And it's an amazingly written story. I blew through this book in like 1 4-hour sitting. I was not anticipating that I would be that's how I would be reading this book, but it was absolutely incredible. I would recommend it. Again, very heavy subject matter. Obviously, it's dealing with war, it's dealing with sexual violence, it's dealing with and she doesn't hold back. It's very similar to reading something along the lines of Night by Elie Wiesel, and she actually talks about her own relationship with that book and the importance of her like discovering reading that as a teenager, being somebody that went through something similar to Elie Wiesel's experiences in the Holocaust. So that is The Girl Who Smiled Beads. Alrighty. And then the last few are some like YA middle grade books that I read this month just for funsies. I was able to finish reading A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I think that this book actually does better as a myth-making story than it does as a story. It's a little bit more similar to like if Lord of the Rings had been written for middle grade, or if some type of mythological tale like the Iliad or the Odyssey had been adapted for middle grade. And I don't remember that from when I read this as a child, so I think I was a little bit surprised when I went back to reread it, because I don't think I was expecting the sort of high mythological, high fantasy tone. But of course, it's Ursula K. Le Guin, so the writing is incredible. And this is a series. I am not planning to like actively continue with reading the rest of the series at this moment, but I think when I'm in the mood again to read some more of her writing, I'm definitely going to go pick up the second book, which is called The Tombs of Atuan. Solitaire by Alice Oseman. I'd had this book on my shelf for a little while after I finished reading her book Radio Silence last year, which I adored. Go read that if you haven't read it and you care at all about fandom novels or Welcome to Night Vale-esque things. If you know what that means, you know you're probably going to enjoy this book. That was my oven beeping. Anyways, I did not like this book as much as I liked Radio Silence, but it is Alice Oseman's first novel. It's the story of this girl who is in high school, and she's kind of like burnt out on just life in general. She doesn't think anything matters. She doesn't think that anything should really be taken seriously. And then there's this strange sort of like almost anarchist prankster at her school who's known only as Solitaire, that is making all of these really strange things happen around and making everybody like question their priorities and where they're going with their life. And I think that this is a really strong story when it comes to the importance of feeling and emotions and feeling things authentically and giving yourself the permission to feel the feelings that you feel. I said that a lot of times really fast. But yeah, I did enjoy this book. There is some like trigger warning-y stuff for like eating disorders and like talking about suicide and suicidality and things like that. So if you're sensitive to that, maybe save this one for a later date. But it was still really good, and that was Solitaire. And then the final book that I finished in the month of April was one of the books that I picked up from Emerald City Comic Con, which is now out, Prepared by Vera Brosgol. I met her at Comic Con. She actually signed the book for me, which I thought was really cool. I'm going to see if I can find that. So she drew this little chipmunk thingy here. she drew this little chipmunk, which actually plays kind of an important role in her story about her experiences at a... so that chipmunk actually plays an important role in her story about her experiences going to this Russian Orthodox church summer camp when she's a kid. She doesn't really, it's semi-autobiographical, so it's actually based off of her real experiences, but it is somewhat fictionalized. So when she's growing up, she kind of feels out of place among all of the other girls in her age group because her family is Russian and she feels like she doesn't fit into the mainstream American culture. But one of the things that all of her friends from school are really excited about is going to summer camp. So when she finds out that there's a Russian camp, she like convinces her mom to let her go, and she and her brother start going, and she's like convinced she's gonna make all these lifelong camp friends and gonna have a great time. And when she gets there, she hates it. She gets, for some reason, as a 9-year-old, put in with a bunch of 14-year-olds, so the other girls are like kind of mean to her. They think that she's weird because she doesn't wear a bra because like she's 9, and she's really more interested in doing like more, I don't know, more childish things, I guess, because she hasn't really quite hit that like awkward teenage phase. And so she hates the camp. She keeps writing these letters to her mom, begging her mom to come pick her up. And she doesn't know that her mom has actually signed her and her brother up to stay on for 2 extra weeks instead of the original 2 weeks that they planned to stay. They're going to be there for 4 weeks. So she's like all ready to be miserable. So it's a story about like a girl having an experience of coming of age and having an experience of like getting herself through a difficult situation. It's about the importance of friendship and making friends with people that you can trust and who respect you. And I really, really liked this book. I read it very quickly. It was like a one-sitting kind of middle grade graphic novel read. I'm really impressed with the way that just by hand drawing this character, she has like the most expressive eyebrows. You can tell exactly what she's feeling in the book just by looking at her eyebrows. So I really enjoyed this book. And that is going to wrap it up for all of the books that I finished reading in the month of April. I'm sure that I link my first half of April reads somewhere as a card earlier on in the video, so you can go watch that if you want to know what I read in the first half of the month. Thank you all so much for watching. Please make sure to go ahead on down to the comments and let me know what you thought of the books that I talked about. Have you read any of these? Did you have any books that stood out particularly to you in this month, whether they were really good, really bad, or just interesting? Let's go ahead and have a chat about that downstairs. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!